There's a subtle discomfort in watching a cultural icon age in real time. Not in collapse, not in scandal, but in gradual deceleration. Sir Rod Stewart, one of the most recognizable voices in rock history, now stands in that space. At 81, with a career spanning more than 6 decades, he has achieved almost every milestone imaginable: global record sales, knighthood, multiple Hall of Fame inductions, and sold-out stadiums across generations. Yet the question that quietly follows him is not about what he achieved, but what it means to keep going when everything has already been won. His story today is not about rise or fall, but endurance against time itself. The quiet slowdown of a legend. In recent years, Rod Stewart's public appearances have carried a different tone, still charismatic, still sharp, but softened by time. Moments like his appearance at a 2025 award ceremony, where his children honored him, revealed something more vulnerable beneath the persona. Performing songs tied to youth and memory, he appeared briefly reflective, as if aware of the distance between who he was and who he has become. When illness forced him to cancel tour dates, it wasn't treated as scandal but exhaustion. Yet his own reaction, describing himself as devastated, suggested something deeper than fatigue, a life still emotionally bound to the stage. From Highgate roots to global fame. Born in 1945 in Highgate, London, Rod Stewart's early life was far removed from stadium lights. He grew up in a working-class household, more interested in football than music at first, dreaming of a professional sports career. Music, however, became the unexpected path. His voice, raspy, textured, unmistakably lived in, was never polished in a conventional sense. It carried experience rather than perfection. By the late 1960s, he had already begun moving through Britain's evolving rock scene, building a reputation not just as a singer, but as a presence that could not be ignored for long. Maggie May and the Sudden Explosion. The turning point arrived with Maggie May in 1971, a song that was not initially intended as the centerpiece of anything significant. It quietly grew into something far larger than expectations, reaching #1 in both the UK and the United States. Almost overnight, Rod Stewart transformed from rising musician to global figure. At just 26, he was suddenly carrying the weight of international fame. This shift was not gradual, it was explosive. Success arrived faster than identity could adapt, and from that moment forward, his life was shaped by momentum that rarely slowed. Fame, reinvention, and the Faces era before and during his solo rise, Stewart was part of the Faces, a band known for its raw, unpolished energy. But fame has a way of reorganizing relationships. As his solo career accelerated, tensions naturally followed. He was becoming larger than the group itself, and that imbalance reshaped everything around him. Rather than remain fixed in one identity, he continually reinvented himself, moving through rock, pop, and even disco influences. Each transformation kept him relevant but also subtly distanced him from earlier versions of himself, as if each era required leaving something behind. The cost of adaptation and identity shifts. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Rod Stewart was no longer just a musician but a global celebrity. His image, glamorous, flamboyant, constantly visible, became as recognizable as his voice. Reinvention kept him at the center of popular culture, but it also created tension between artistic identity and public expectation. Critics questioned his shifts in genre and style, especially during his disco-era success. Yet adaptation was not simply strategy. It was survival within an industry that punishes stagnation. The cost, however, was subtle: the gradual fragmentation of a singular, consistent self over decades of reinvention. Health battles and survival instinct. Behind the spotlight, Stewart faced serious health challenges, including thyroid cancer in 2000 and later prostate cancer, which he eventually spoke about publicly to encourage early detection in others. These moments reframed his public image from purely entertainer to survivor. Yet survival introduced a new layer of complexity. Continuing to perform after such battles was not just professional choice, it was personal affirmation. Each recovery reinforced the idea that stopping meant more than rest. It meant stepping away from something deeply tied to identity, purpose, and emotional structure. The stage as oxygen for Rod Stewart, performance has often been described less as profession and more as necessity. He has compared the energy of live crowds to something elemental, like oxygen. That connection helps explain why retirement has never fully taken hold. The stage is not just where he works, it is where he exists most fully. In interviews and appearances, there are moments of reflection, but also unmistakable attachment to the act of performing. Even when advised to slow down, he has repeatedly returned to touring, suggesting that withdrawal from music would feel less like rest and more like disappearance. Touring at 80, devotion or denial. Continuing to tour into his 80s raises questions that are less about capability and more about meaning. When illness or exhaustion interrupts schedules, it is met not with resignation, but disappointment. That emotional response reveals a deeper truth. The stage is not easily relinquished. For someone whose life has been defined by audience response for over half a century, stepping away is not a simple transition. It is an identity rupture. Whether this persistence is devotion to craft or resistance to time is unclear, but it reflects a profound human struggle with relevance and continuity. Legacy, family, and reflection. Today, Stewart's life includes not only music, but a large family, long-term relationships, and grandchildren, elements that point toward legacy beyond performance. Yet legacy is not always experienced as closure. Even with recognition, awards, and generational influence, there remains a tension between past achievement and present identity. Reflection in his later years often carries both pride and awareness of time's limits. The question is no longer what he built, but how long he remains within the role he built himself into and what happens when that role eventually quiets. Conclusion: when time becomes the final audience. Rod Stewart's story is not one of decline, but of persistence in the face of time's certainty. Fame gave him a platform that few ever reach, but it also created a lifelong relationship with performance that is not easily set aside. At 81, he remains active not simply out of habit, but out of identity shaped over decades. The unsettling part is not watching him slow down, but recognizing that even legends cannot outrun the fundamental structure of time. In the end, every performer faces the same audience, one that does not applaud, only measures.